Paula Kahumbu, you are the Chief Executive Officer of Wildlife Direct, based in Kenya.
Yes.
Tell us about Wildlife Direct and what you do.
Wildlife Direct is a Kenyan organization founded by Richard Leakey in 2004. And what we do is we campaign on major emerging wildlife crises across Africa. Right now, our campaign is the Hands Off Our Elephants campaign, which is basically a campaign to mobilize the Kenyan public to support efforts to protect elephants wherever they occur across the country and actually put pressure on the leadership to take the necessary actions to prevent poaching and to prevent the transiting of ivory across Kenya.
Have you made a difference? Are there results to be shown?
So the campaign is 2 years old, and we know from surveys, market surveys, that more than 45% of people in Kenya are aware of this campaign and agree with this campaign. The First Lady is our patron, and in our first year, what we were able to achieve is a new law for wildlife. Kenya now has the most severe penalties in the world. We have a fine of 20 million shillings for killing an elephant or for handling ivory. That's about 2 million rand, and or life imprisonment. We also have, for the first time, the creation of a wildlife prosecution unit. 35 people are dedicated only to wildlife crimes. This is unique in East Africa, is new, and it's going to be increased to 100 prosecutors in the next few months. So that's, a phenomenal impact, and the result directly from a study we did in the courts where we monitored the outcomes of trials in Kenyan courts on wildlife. And we found that very few people were going to jail. Most cases were being thrown out. Most files were lost or misplaced or damaged. And when we presented this to the Chief Justice, he was horrified at what was happening, that these injustices were part of the reason why Kenya was seen as a safe haven for wildlife criminals. The Director of Public Prosecutions also responded, and the Kenyan government allocated $20 million to fighting wildlife crime, which resulted in the recruitment of 560 new rangers. In
your country, the debate is mostly around protecting elephants, more so than rhino, as is the case in South Africa. Am I right?
So our campaign is called Hands Off for Elephants because that was really where we started. Elephants are animals that are so charismatic and they're so easy to relate to. The public love elephants. So we use elephants as a flagship to talk about all these other issues. So the campaign is dealing with rhinos, elephants, and any other wildlife crimes. But we're using the label of Hands Off Our Elephants as a way to get the public support.
And the poaching of elephants is getting worse. Can you give us a number, perhaps? What poaching figures have you got?
Poaching in Kenya started to increase in 2009, just after the one-off sale of ivory in China. And it increased, and in 2013, we asked our government to declare it a national disaster. As a result of many of the actions I've just mentioned, we have 560 new rangers on the ground. We have extremely severe penalties. Numbers of poached elephants has declined by 50% in 12 months. Last year we had 160 elephants poached. Previous year was 380.
Thank you. Is the debate legalizing trade in ivory or rhino horn a debate which Kenyans are engaged in as well?
Well, Kenya has held a very strong position of no trade for a very long time. There is no ownership of wildlife in Kenya. There is no hunting of wildlife in Kenya. And there is absolutely no question that Kenya would propose to trade in ivory or rhino horn.
So private owners, farmers, ranchers, conservancies, are they allowed to have rhino on their properties?
Absolutely. We have 150 conservancies in Kenya. And the private conservancies support over 52% of the rhino herds in Kenya. And they do this in collaboration. They protect them in collaboration with the state as well as with the police. But they finance most of the costs of protecting these animals.
From your work and your experience in Kenya and in East Africa, are there any lessons that you would like to perhaps suggest to South Africans, because there's great concern about our wildlife, and I'm sure one would listen with open ears?
I think that the biggest success in our campaign in Kenya has been the massive support we've got from the public. We called a rally, we called people to the streets last year. We got 3,000 people marched down the streets of Nairobi for 10 kilometers. Some people were on crutches, some people were in wheelchairs. And this is the support. People have this incredible love for wildlife. We have a very ancient relationship with wildlife. In some tribes, they believe elephants are our ancestors. Other tribes have elephants as their totems, elephants and rhinos, even snakes. So Kenyans have a very close and spiritual relationship with wildlife. And this is something that I think can be brought to South Africa. I've been surprised by the lack of engagement of black South Africans. I think we need to do something to inspire black South Africans, bring role models up, and give people a sense of hope, not just hope, but a sense of pride. You know, an animal that is so majestic, elephants are regarded as majestic, and that, you know, we aspire to be like them. When you lose that connection, you lose something important to yourself and your self-respect even. And I think that South African tribes must have ancient traditions that link them to wildlife.
Do you think that the Kenyan concept of no citizens being allowed to own wildlife, an elephant or rhino, has played a role in this very fascinating approach towards wildlife? Because, as we know, in South Africa it's very different. Private ownership of wildlife, rhinos, for example, is perfectly normal here.
I'm not saying Kenya's position is better or worse, but most of our wildlife is migratory. It would be very hard to own an elephant or a rhino or a lion or any of these animals which move over thousands of kilometers every year without disrupting the ecology of the landscape. Many of the land areas where these animals occur are occupied by people who also practice migrations. So it works very well. Livestock and wildlife communities that live in together with wildlife, like the Maasai, the Samburu, and various other tribes. It works really well. So there really has never been this pressure or this desire communicated by Kenyans to the state that we want to own these animals. That hasn't really happened.
The theme and the topic for this seminar here in Cape Town is wildlife in crisis. Wildlife in Kenya, is it under threat? Would you call it a crisis, or are you concerned? Give us a status report.
I think that wildlife across the entire continent is in crisis. We have lost a lot of land to development, to fragmentation with roads and fences. We've lost a lot of the wildlife estate, which is really unfortunate. So I do think there is a crisis. The poaching accelerates that problem. And then we have climate change, which makes it even worse. Certain species are under severe threat. In Kenya, some of our antelopes are reduced to just a few tens. They will blink out unless we do something. But the most interesting thing is the amount of land area under conservation has doubled in the last 15 years because of communities and private landowners deciding that they want to do conservation. And they are basically banking on the opportunities provided through tourism.
Yes.
And it's working in some areas, it's not working in other areas, but what they get out of conservancies is a platform to work cooperatively with their neighbours. It gives them access to government support, and it gives them a new form of security, which is very practical, and it allows them to do other land uses.
Let me ask you whether your organization and similar organizations involved with the protection of wildlife, environmental issues, whether you think sufficient contact and interaction with similar South African organizations. Is there room for improvement? What is happening in that area?
I think it's really unfortunate that there isn't enough networking among conservation organizations across the whole continent. South Africa really leads in so many ways, and we could benefit enormously in Kenya. And I think we also have examples that would be very useful down here in South Africa. I do know that when it comes to wildlife management in a farmed kind of setup or management of species that need to be translocated, we've learned a lot of lessons from South Africa. I know that most of the methods that we're using actually were developed here in South Africa and brought to Kenya. So there has been a limited amount of, cross-pollination. We can do much better.
The fact that Kenya and South Africa have really taken up very different positions on wildlife, crime, protection, etc., in international fora such as CITES, Has that, do you think, played a role in influencing the relationship between Kenya and South Africa as far as that aspect is concerned?
Absolutely. I used to run the CITES office for Kenya. I headed the delegation for 2 years running. And I headed the delegation at 2 CITES conferences. And I recall very well how aggressive and antagonistic our interactions were with South Africa. And it felt like a great loss for each country that we agree on so much. We agree we want to save rhinos. We agree we want to save elephants. We just have very different methods. And I think we failed to find a way of discussing and debating it in a healthy way and still being friends afterwards and still benefiting from each other. I know that in between the CITES conventions, there's a lot of stuff going on. Kenyans come and train in South Africa. South Africans come to Kenya and train our people in Kenya. It's unfortunate that every time CITES comes around, there is this tension. And then this, attacks on social media start up. And I wish we could get away from that. And when these 2 species, elephants and rhinos, are at such a critical stage, I wish we could also have a truce where the 2 countries agree, look, we're not going to go down this road again this time. Let's work together. Let's see what we can do together to stop the poaching.
Maybe your presence here in Cape Town at a seminar on wildlife crime could be the foot in the door for greater interaction so that we can talk about a truce and more normal relations.
I've spent time in Hong Kong and China and in other neighbouring countries around Kenya, because I think when we sit in our own countries and bury ourselves in our issues, we will miss each other in the communications.
Thanks a lot.